How's that, guys? So sorry, I do apologize for this, but that should work now. I do believe what you guys were getting were feedback from the desktop audio. Looks like we're just hearing the input audio now. Okay, so without further ado, I hear party, so forth. Let's get going on this. I want to take a look, and I want to throw in some disclaimers, and we're going to talk about those disclaimers now. First, I want to say that what we're working on is the thought experiment. This is a thought experiment that we are trying to just theorize what a potential 5.75 could do. We may publish it, we may not. Any game designers that are following us, following this, if they get any ideas, cool. But yeah, it should be fine. Sorry about that again. We're just going to make sure that that is muted. Yeah, the desktop audio is completely muted. The input audio capture is working. That's this thing right here, and I can adjust it if it ends up being a little bit of an issue for you guys. Okay, so the first thing about this is that this is going to be an irrevocable license. I want to make sure people are 100% aware of that. It is going to be, if we do proceed with an OGL, it will be perpetual. And it will be, as we also stated, free as an SRD. And this is, I said, this is, most companies just do this privately with their own little group. I am doing this as a public. I'm doing this as a community. I'm hoping and inviting everyone to volunteer their comments. I'm going to see them best I can. You don't have to do any sponsored content. If you want to do a super chat, you can. I'm not going to stop you, but I am going to try to read all the comments. Just another disclaimer here. Anyone who contributes can submit their name as a contributor. If you guys actually feel that you have a really good idea and we're implementing that, you can send me an email at dsxmachina@gmail.com and tell me your name, and I can add you as a contributor. And I also want to add that if this follows through, the SRD will be released at the same time or before any form of official DM release, one that you can purchase that will have the full layout and artwork. That means this, if I end up doing a full publication, the SRD and the full rules will be released for free first, and a paid release is just going to be layout and artwork. And the only thing that will be copyrighted will be layout and artwork, and it will not be any content. So everything that's going to be contained within this this video and any future videos, if we do them, will be entirely free to the community and won't be owned by anyone, which is the reason why I got to calling it OSG 5.75, which stands for Open Source Gaming 5.75. Now, of course, why? Oops, sorry, 6.75. Why am I calling it 5.75? Well, primarily the reasons why I'm calling it 5.75 is obvious. This is meant to be a spiritual successor to the sequence of Dungeons and Dragons we've seen so far. But and I also call it 5.75 as to be thematically connected to 3.75 as a kind of thematic connection, as a carry through in the spirit of what the 3.75 did. So we're not trying to state specifically this is an advancement of 5 or a giant middle finger to 1D&D. This is just a number. At the end of the day, it's just a number we're throwing in, and we're not trying to evoke any specific comparisons, even though it's obvious. So the stream and any content contained will be for the SRD, and outside of credit, DSMAC will not offer any financial compensation for anyone contributing to the stream. We will be dealing with entirely open source rules and not IP, so we are talking mechanics only, not settings, not characters, or anything anyone can copyright. If DEM pursues an official publication for these rules, except artwork, the entirety of the included content will not be copyrighted and will be offered an SRD and OGL. That was the other reason why I went for this idea of calling it open source gaming. I'm not calling it DSX Machina 5.75. I am not calling it Amethyst 5.75. I'm calling it OSG, so it's completely neutral. So if someone does end up playing with it, you know, so. Let's see here. Okay, much better. Audio's good. Like I said, we're doing this as part of Open Gaming. I'm not going to copy paste the Open Gaming license now. We don't know the situation here, but I want to make sure people are aware. It is we are making if we end up doing an Open Gaming license. At the end of the day, this video is about creating the mechanics, not dealing with the legalese. But if an OGL gets written that's going to be connected to this rule set, it will be irrevocable, perpetual, and freely accessible for all the time. do I want to consider using existing license? I mean, it's one of those situations that if Deus Ex Machina continues doing some work, we can do things non-OGL for 5e. We can also produce something for some of the new systems. I've already been reached out by N-World for Level Up, and obviously I know a few people at Cobalt, so I'm obviously going to be made aware of what they're doing there. And obviously Paizo did something today as well, so it would be interesting. Thanks, How to RPG. Thanks, right? And greetings, everyone. Okay, so we're going to get into this now that I've got my disclaimer out of the way. First of all, I wanted to say that this is not, we are inspiring, these rules are going to be inspired by what is going to be D&D rule sets and variants of them from 3.5 to 5th edition. That's the other disclaimer I'm going to make. So someone says, hey, you should bring this over from Palladium. I'm not terribly interested in that. I'm talking about trying to create a spiritual successor to something we already know. And I have a stack of books that are either directly connected to that format or something that's a derivative, including my own work. So I have an Ultra One character sheet just because it's a good idea for reference. And the first thing I'm going to be asking is dealing with the creation of the characters. Now, I think it's safe to say that we're going to have levels. I'm curious about whether or not levels are like the third edition, fifth edition. They always went through a 1 through 20 level system. When we got to 4, we actually went to 30. I'm actually not against going to 30 levels. I mean, obviously, if you go back to basic D&D, you had. Basic. We're going back to the 80s. Thanks, Castles and Casters. Open D&D all the way. When we're dealing with the level system, one thing, 5th edition, I don't think 5th edition, at least not in any official map books I have. And as a disclaimer, I've often said that I am not Wizards of the Coast's customer because I have not paid them any money since the original Core 3 books back a long time ago. So once again, we're dealing with this level system 1 to 20. 4th edition went to 30. Basic D&D went to 20, but then there was the very famous, I think it was the pink box. That was the epic levels, and epic levels gave you just crazy godlike stuff that took you to 30. Now, 4th edition, I haven't played 4th edition in so long. In 4th edition, we have, you had the capability, once you got past a 20, you got to pick something that was called an epic path. Now, some of you guys, and people are going to say, don't touch 4th edition. 4th edition is horrible. If we don't learn from these systems, they are less than useless. And I want to make sure that we're not divorcing anything. Are there aspects of 4th edition I don't care for? Yeah, obviously. We won't go into huge details of what I don't like, but going into details of what I do like. But we do know that one thing that they did, which was disconnected from their characters, like I said, they had their what they're called. In the case of the fighter, they had something called Paragon Paths. It's mechanically awesome. Yes, it is. Paragon Paths, and Paragon Paths gave you 3 non-power abilities, and then gave you a new attack ability or a utility ability, basically, on what you did. And they did a couple of those. Now, one thing they did do, which I thought was very interesting, and I'm trying to see if I can find it here, is that they created something called Epic Destinies. That's what it was called. It was called Epic Destinies. And the Epic Destinies were, interestingly enough, not technically connected to any specific class. There were a few things, like the Archmage had to be a 21st century, 21st level wizard. And the same thing, they gave you 3 abilities that were not powers, and then you got a new utility ability at level 26, and then you got some kind of super cool ability at 30th level. So that's really neat, and I kind of like that idea. Not the power system. If we're going to say something we don't care for, I know most people got turned off by the way they did the power system and the way they kind of made it to mimic an MMO. That was their intent. Back in 2008, they're trying to emulate an MMO. So do we want to go to all the way to 30th level? I think there's actually there is the potential. I like creating frameworks and giving people a sandbox, and if I can give people the largest sandbox that they can get, I can see why 5th edition wouldn't do that. 5th edition was all about simplifying the whole system, which is the reason why even today I don't think they've ever gone past 20th level. When you hit 20th level, your character is basically done. Like Gloomhaven, the character gets retired and you bring somebody new into the fray. But I think what we may end up doing, and I think this might be an interesting idea, is to have a level 1 to 20 class, and within that class having, we can call it Paragon Paths. They haven't used the word Paragon Paths in a while. Paragon Paths aren't in 5th edition, so why not? And Paragon Paths are kind of within, well, just a disclaimer, I have horrible typing, so I will constantly spell things wrong. Paragon paths are within the class. They'll probably be universal, though, like the way we did in Ultramodern, just so that you don't have to be stuck with one specific thing. So Paragon paths within the class, but then as an option, you could have the Epic Destiny or the Epic Path. We'll say the Epic Destiny for now, and that is something entirely separate. So the class would go to 20th level. And then if the GM wanted and the players wanted, they can say, hey, let's keep going. Then you pick an Epic Destiny, which will be something on top. And it'll be probably 10 more levels. So the class will probably still be stuck to 20th levels. And then maybe we'll have this Epic Destiny. I think that's a neat idea. I'm open to debate from everything on that. So that's the level thing. Of course, people will ask, do we need to have classes? And I think ultimately people like being classed. We see that in video games and online and stuff like that. People like having a class that gives them abilities, even if the abilities are generic. So we'll probably stick with classes. I think now, obviously, that wizards themselves have actually opted out of race and replaced with species. We're still going to go with species. And just because it is easier, and especially when you deal with aliens and all that stuff, it's just an easy term to use, and we'll still be using that term, but it's not something that WotC can in any way copyright. So we're going to probably stick with species, and having species I think is important, obviously because we're dealing with fantasy and aliens, and there could be some distinct differences. Then comes down to, before we get, okay, do we deal with attributes first? Okay, we'll do attributes first because that's in the process of creation. Let's see here. Okay, so we have strength, dexterity, constitution. Obviously, this is vigor. This is part of Ultramodern 5's enhanced stuff. We're going to ignore that for now and just go intelligence, wisdom, charisma. The first thing we need to think about here is... I'm just going to think here whether or not we keep the top 6. Now, we have had conversations about whether or not 5e or Hasbro can copyright the 6 or the term specifically. Now, I know that in GURPS, for example, which is from the 80s, they had strength, intelligence, dexterity, but they didn't have wisdom or charisma. They had health. They just had 4 attributes. So I think here, let's see here. Like I said, guys, please comment on this. If I hit something you like or don't like, please mention it in the comments and tell me what you think. We were talking with strength, and we have dexterity. Now, if we want, we could rename these. I mean, we can call strength might. We can name that agility. Constitution, we can name health, because that also works. The intelligence, though, that's a bit tricky. I mean, we really get down to it. I mean, what can we do with intelligence? It's not really a big deal. Brilliance, you can say intellect, not perception, not skill, or and I don't want to say the word IQ. Brain power, maybe, but that seems that's a very rubbery term. Maybe we'll say intellect. Now this is assuming that we don't just keep the names. We may just keep the names themselves. It doesn't matter. So, and then we go on from that to wisdom. Wisdom, I'm not sure what wisdom could be replaced with if we end up having to do that. Let's see here. Experience? No, that's not it. Insight. That's not so bad. Now, insight I know is a skill, but that might be better in that capacity. And then finally, we have charisma. Once again, like I said, I don't think we're going to need to replace these. I don't think charisma should be attractiveness because charisma is more than that. Magnetism, appeal, that's something that's going to be tricky. Charisma is something very unique because it deals with not just physical attractiveness, but emotional attractiveness, basically how you can draw people. And charisma is something that's going to be tricky. I mean, we could play it with allure, but at the end of the day, I think most of these we won't need to mess with too much. Okay, so let's put those for now, and we keep that present. We'll just keep on going here. Yeah, so I know memory is pretty good. I don't know about Conta health. It might confuse people if you're using HP, which sometimes might cult health. Okay, that's a good point. You can obviously, but that thing being said, as I'll get into it, Constitution has always been tightly wound to hit points, and I think that we might want to attach it even more intimately, and I'll go into that. But like I said, these are, personality is not bad. That's actually not so bad an idea. I kind of like that. IQ is pretty good. The only thing about IQ is that IQ has an actual variable. There's actually a definitive number of IQ. There is actual value. So you say you have a 7 IQ, or now I know people are going to say that. Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't think we need to rename variant elements. I'm just doing this as a thought experiment. If it comes to a situation where we may have to, I don't think we're going to have to. But this is just to hear me out there. Chances are we're probably not going to change these. But if we were to, but we'll move on past this just because, like I said, I don't think we're going to have to play with this, and we're going to get into ability scores. Now, the process and how to create an ability score. Use of Batoon attributes, smarts and chutzpah. I like that, but probably not. Memory's pretty good, but memory that could be played with. Reason I like mind is pretty good. I've always really loved the way Fallout did their breakdown. They actually had an acronym for the whole thing. I think that's really cool. Now that being said, Rye, I mean, we're gonna get to this now. The classic D&D from the time immemorial all the way to the beginning, we always had a 3 to 18 variable, and the 3 to 18 variable is because it came out of a 3 die 6. Now, when we got to 5th edition, these numbers meant nothing, and it always bothered me that they kept the numbers but didn't change anything. So if you had a 16 dexterity, the 16 didn't mean anything. Only the +3 meant something. Now, people who remember this, no, you're absolutely right. Do not want, like I said, renaming stuff arbitrarily. I'm just saying that it may come to a situation if we get to a position where Wizard of the Coast makes a play to copyright things that we don't want to. I'm going to assume we're not going to do that. I just did that to kind of play around, but we're not going to go around spending the entirety of this video renaming things. That's not what we're talking about. But going back to what we're saying about 3 to 18, people who remember third edition and definitely the old editions. The old editions had a there's a reason to have those values. Now, if you guys remember, I didn't actually bring my old player's handbook out. I didn't grab that. I just grabbed the 3rd edition stuff and up. If you had a 16 and int, you had a 160 IQ. That was kind of what they were trying to play with. And I think if you had like a 15 strength, I think you could bench press like 150 pounds. Pounds. And if you had like an 18 dex, what was it? You could jump 18 feet, was it? I think something like that. But there were few instances within 5th edition where these numbers actually meant something. So that we going into this, we have two options. We keep it the way it is, but I think if we keep it to 3d18 value, if we keep the 3d18 variable, I think the number has to mean something. Now, for those people who remember 4th edition, if you had a 15 constitution, you started off with 15 hit points, and I like that idea. So I want to make sure that every one of these, if we're going to go with the 3d18 value, that the 3d18 value has some tangible meaning outside of simply being what adjusts your variable. It has to have something. Otherwise, there's no point in having it other than tradition. Tradition's the only reason why it's in 5th edition. 4th edition, I don't remember, because I have them here, as you might imagine. I think it's ironic. I can't really see it because I have this thing blocked off, but my 4th edition book is in not good shape. That's because it got used. So the other big thing, let's see here. Dexterity, it contributes to your reflex defense, might contribute to your armor class. Yeah, so there's very few situations in 4th edition where the 3d18 value actually did something. We do know your constitution score is added to your hit points, and that's the only example, I think, to my knowledge. So I would want to find something that these will work, and there's a couple ways to do it. Now, the option 2 is that we don't do that at all. We actually ignore the 318. And someone's going to say, don't do that. It's tradition. You have to do it. Okay. But like I said, like everything else, hear me out. And we'll look into this because obviously there's other ways to do it. One is that we could simply have a -5 to plus X skill set. So your strength is +1 or +2. That is obviously very clumsy. The one thing I liked with Mechton had a 1 to 10. Now, Mechton is something I've always been an admirer of, and I actually have one of their books here. I actually have a fusion-based book rather than Mechton, just because the fusion system is all basically in one section. But the way they did it, which I love in its simplicity, and the fact that your attribute was between 1 and 10, your skill was between 1 and 10, and your die roll was a d10, which was fantastic. That means the random number generator was only a third of it, and so which means 2/3 of your success was determined by your character's ability. Now, this is in comparison to 5th edition, where you have a die 20, a 1 to 20 variable, and in some cases only a +4 or +5 benefit, which means you're relying more on the random number generator to make things work. Now, for those people who don't know, I've said it at length, I was part of the Friends and Family Alpha playtest for 5th edition. I got on board because I knew Mike Merles, and he reached out to me thanks to my my Living Dice article, which is an open letter to Wizards of the Coast after the 4th edition fiasco. And so I know a couple things about what 5th edition had, and 5th edition had a one temporary rule. This is, you guys didn't see this when the OGL when the playtest became public, but there were contested spell rolls. First, there were no proficiency bonuses, so your attribute bonus was it, and then you had contested rolls, which means if you wanted to attack, you would roll, and then the defender would make their saving throw, and then you would compare those. And I had a very long letter I sent to the creators. I sent to Mike Merle saying, this is a horrific idea, because now you're taking that random number generator from 1 to 20 to 2 to 40, and then on top of that, if you add in just the attribute bonuses and nothing else, you're stuck with a +5 or +6, which means only like 20-30% of the entire success is determined by your skill. Everything else is done by the random number generator. And Mechton really had a real nail on that. And I really, really love that. So now, obviously, there is something to be said about keeping it within the -5 to +5 architecture. That actually is not so bad, Liquid Friends. There may be situations where I go into my books and start mucking around with stuff like that. Let's see what else we have here. If wisdom is tied to spellcasting, maybe a variable 6 stat, a stat tied to the type of character, mechanical or tech-based education tied to scholars, arcane tied to spellcasters. That's cool. I want to make this more universal, I think. And well, in third edition, fourth edition, I think the way they work with scores is even numbers give you a new +1 to your score, while the odd numbers was used as a prerequisite for some features. That's good. That's not so bad. Having odd attributes. I don't know if they did. I don't know that you're probably right. I don't recall ever noticing that in fifth edition. I'd have to look at my fifth edition if they did do that. Oh, actually, where is my 5e book? I brought all my books, but I didn't bring my 5e book. 1 second. Luckily, it's on the thing behind me. But I don't know. Obviously, there isn't much when it comes to prerequisites ever. I mean, even feats don't have prerequisites. Now, one thing they did in with at least with fifth edition, which I did like, was that every single level gave you something. So I think that's important that we maintain that. That being said, yeah. Going in and adjusting your attribute score by 1 and not getting anything out of it is a little frustrating. So I think there could be some aspects, like I said, having strength times 10 being what you can deadlift, for example. I think that's not a bad idea. Constitution, the value is your hit points. IQ. Now here's something that. How about, and hear me out, guys, hear me out. I say guys, I mean everybody. What if your attribute score, maybe your attribute score, for example, like if you had an int of 15, that is the base number when making like a knowledge check, which means, if you have an int of 15, you always pass 15 and under DC checks. If that's something that, like I said, I don't want to create a whole pie chart of things that you get if you have a 12 int or a 14 int. I'm trying to create one thing that makes sense for all of it. I think odd number is something that you can see multi-classing in 5e, yeah. How about each specific gifts a certain number of points to divide amongst the ability scores? Yeah, potentially, yeah. Or rather, as you'd like. I'm still stuck on this thing here. Intellect, wisdom could be the same thing. Like, what if wisdom, for example, the base, your attribute score for... Okay, let's make things a bit more sensible. Let's put that up with intelligence here. I'm going to remove these for now because we're not really talking about them. The base number... is when doing knowledge DC checks. Constitution, health will equal your hit points. Might will be deadlift. I think dexterity. The problem is with people always associate dexterity with jumping, and dexterity is maneuverability. I don't know if I want to do jumping in that capacity. We'll think about that. So that's on me. So strength would be deadlift, potentially. Agility, or dexterity, and that will be hit points. And we got that one. And then we have wisdom. What if your wisdom attribute equals your passive perception? Just I know. People are gonna say that's broken. I'm just spitballing ideas. Dexterity could be your minimum distance as you jump. My issue is that if you have a 16, it gives you an extra foot. That's tough. Throw that out to the group and see what you guys think. If there's something we can attribute the number of the 3d18 number, strength plus now. this is something else I'm going to talk about with his points, because that makes, once again, people say that gives you a whole bunch of additional hit points. But let's see here. That's tough. Like I said, I'll let you guys think about that, mull it over, and I think that's a yeah. Okay, so we'll continue working with that for now, and then we'll kind of get back to it. Charisma. Whew, that's tough because everyone always talks about charisma being a dump stat. So now I'm interested in making charisma awesome in some way. Because everyone knows strength, dexterity, constitution are huge. Intelligence, wisdom are great for skill sets and spell casting. But unless you're a bard or an actor, or you're playing with that build with a rogue, charisma is very, very. It's always been. I mean, if you guys ever saw, there's a wonderful board game called Role Player where you're rolling dice to create a character. It takes the entire process of making a character and makes that the game. I think it's brilliant, and I'm annoyed that I never thought of that. And in that game, charisma is the dump stat, which I thought was hilarious because it's the least important stat of the whole thing. Now, we're not going to play with the idea of minimum numbers of, like, you don't need a 17 charisma to be a paladin. We're not going to go in that direction. But we are going to go into thinking about some things about that. Now, dexterity, I want to look in the player's handbook back in dexterity here. Range attacks, armor class, reflex saving throws. I guess the 3.5 didn't play with that either. I'm looking at strength, and they say, your strength modifier, but it doesn't actually say anything about the strength score itself. So it looks like 3.5 also just did that, and I think that's kind of annoying. So obviously we're not going to see that. That means the whole deadlift IQ thing, was that from the original D20? Like, that's crazy. That goes all the way back to the original Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. I gotta get it, folks. Luckily, I don't live that far away. Okay, so let's look into this very, very quickly here. I just want to look at the old book and see if they ever mentioned anything like that. They have intelligence. Okay, let's take a look here. Now, strength. Oh, see, strength did play a lot of that with AD&D, and I think it's a neat idea. So, if you had a strength of, say, 10, it was normal. Your damage, so you had damage adjustment and a hit probability. Now, of course, they combine that. Yeah, exactly. Endless Nights. Lots of games gamify charisma to be used by some spell classes just to make it viable. I think that's gonna be my mission, my obsession today is making charisma interesting. Now, games kind of ignore encumbrance, and I don't want to mess with encumbrance. Player's Handbook, even the 5e, they barely touched on it. They barely touched on encumbrance, and I don't want to create a situation where people are trying to figure out their encumbrance and their movement, and I don't think I want to do that. But I do like the idea of maybe saying that 180 pounds, like maybe the strength score is your carrying capacity or your capacity, and then maybe times 2 of that, or times 10 is carrying capacity. Oh Jesus, times 10 is carrying capacity, and then potentially maybe times 20 is deadlift. Hit points base knowledge, passive perception. Okay, back to charisma, and let's look at now. Of course, it's amazing how clumsy and clunky AD&D is. Hit probability, damage adjustment, and all this got solved with just attribute changes. So, because the idea is, once again, that if you're creating a situation, and this is something I will be talking about as well, there are certain situations where certain things could be easy. And I've always been annoyed at the fact that you have to roll for everything. And some things, like I've always made a joke that Gordon Ramsay never rolls a 1 when he's cooking. He never does. He always rolls a 10 and up. And so some of the things I put in Ultra Modern are stuff where you don't have to roll under something. And so gamifying the 3D18s is one way of doing that, by showing that we're actually really good at something. So, for example, if we do that with this system and saying, this is your base number for knowledge DC, which means you always roll this number. Wisdom could be your base passive perception. So you can say the fact that everything uses DC 10. Everyone knows about DC 10. Everything is based off of DC 10. What if it wasn't? What if certain things were based off of your scores? Like, what if your passive perception was any modifiers you have to your perception added on to your existing wisdom score? Like, that's one way of doing it. So we don't have a perception skill; it runs off of wisdom. Or and that could be passive perception, or you could roll it. Like, so if your perception skill, like for example, and this is going to get a little clumsy, I know, because people are going to say, what about those people who are going to have a passive perception of 24 because they have an 18 or a 20 wisdom? I'm just talking about those. I think knowledge for intelligence for the DC wisdom, I think that's safe, because knowledge it's not a combat related skill, but perception is a combat related skill. So that may be something we have to return to. So going into dexterity, we're talking about reaction, defenses. That doesn't really affect things. When we look at constitution, we have hit point adjustment, system shock, resurrection, survival. We're not playing with that either. Charisma. So they have here maximum number of henchmen, which I think is hilarious. And then they have reaction adjustment. Now, once again, the attribute will change those type of things. But I want there to be a mechanical benefit. We may have to look back on this later and figure out, because I don't want it to be a requirement, like you need a 15 charisma to get somewhere. And we may come to a situation where we might have to create something we haven't thought of yet. So potentially, I still like the idea of wisdom, your wisdom score being your passive perception. So I'm going to keep that as is, just because, once again, it creates a situation. It makes sense that somebody who is concentrating a lot on wisdom, like a cleric or something like that, would be, they would have slightly better capacity to notice something. Yes, that creates a situation where we could end up having somebody with a passive perception above 20. And that means that whoever has the higher, and that's the thing about passive perception, like players, it's more a monster thing, because GMs, I did an article about this, about dice rolling and the illusion of control. Players, they can say, I have an 18 passive perception, but so many of them want to, they want to roll it. Even like I say, it's almost such a situation that if you had a plus 10 to your passive perception, so a plus 10 to a perception roll, but you also had a 15 passive perception, or even an 18 or a 20 passive perception. A lot of people would say, I'd rather do the die roll. It's that illusion of control. You think it goes back to that old age of creating a situation. It's the Betty Crocker thing, which is a weirdly random thing. So Betty Crocker had this thing about making a cake. And all you need to do is add water to the cake mix, and you made a cake, and it didn't sell. And when they hired a psychoanalyst, he said that this is back in the 50s and 60s, mothers weren't, they didn't like it because they feel like they weren't creating anything. They weren't contributing. They were simply throwing things into water and making a cake. So the psychoanalyst had them say, remove an ingredient, so you had to add an ingredient, and the ingredient was an egg. So by the instant, the all-in-one cake mixes, you had to add water, but you also had to add an egg. And that got over the psychological hitch that people were thinking they weren't really making something. If they added an egg, they were contributing to the whole thing. And that's the same way with dice. People want to roll dice, even though it's not something that they need to do, but they want to roll dice as the impression. As a GM, as you guys might know, a GM does not generally need to roll dice, and most of them they don't. And half the time, if you have a GM screen and you're rolling dice, chances are you're rolling dice, but you've already decided what's going to happen. So the idea of passive perception being based off of your wisdom score, I think it's an interesting idea. I don't think it'd be modified, but I like the idea because perception is such a bizarre skill because almost everybody ends up getting it. It's like the RS Tillany thing from Wheel of Fortune. People knew that RS, T, L, N, E were the most common letters, so they always picked that. And so eventually Wheel of Fortune just gave it to them. And then, of course, people found out what the remaining, and they had them pick 3 more letters than a vowel. And, of course, that ended up always also being exactly the same thing every single time. But that's the English language for you. So giving everyone perception and not having it as a skill and making it part of wisdom, I think is actually not a bad idea. I think it's something that it could work. Now, whether or not it gets nuts with people with a passive perception of 24 or 22, 5th edition obviously put a bottleneck on how high these attribute scores can go. 3.5 didn't. You could get attributes up to 30. But 5th edition wanted to bottle that to 22, and I want to kind of keep on doing that because that creates a situation where our passive perception doesn't get out of control, our hit points don't get out of control. So if we do that, we get back to charisma, which I'm still working on, and I'm just gonna bang my head against it until it works. Dexterity, now that could be minimum jump distance, like you could say that. I'm wondering if you are going for a spiritual successor or are you going for a compatible system, but with your rules variants included? It's a good question. So there's 2 ends of this. And one, if I could create a system that someone can look at and go, I only need to change 1 or 2 things to make this 5e monster compatible to 5.75. There's this insistence constantly that whenever they make a new system, it has to be 100% incompatible. But 3.75 and 3.5 are very close to each other. There's not a lot of things they changed. And when we move from 3.5 to 5e, not a lot has changed. So if you're making a fighter from 3.5 to 5e, it's not like 4th edition where nothing changed. So I think what we want to do is make a system where people who approach it from 5e, which is a massive chunk of the audience, they can look at this and go, there's nothing radically that's messing around. Like we're not screwing around with the core tenets of the system. So if it's 80% compatible and you only need to change 1 or 2 things, I'm okay with that. But I'm talking about trying to create something that is different thematically and create some neat ideas that perhaps people aren't looking at. One of the things we want to do is give the 3d18 variable some weight. Like we're going to still have the -5 to +5 kind of variation that, because I said my other idea was to have the attributes instead of 3d18 went to 10 and your ability modifier being that number -5. It kind of accomplishes the same thing. But tradition insists, like if I was making a system whole cloth that I was not beholden to 5e at all or any system D&D, I would probably do the 1 to 10 and play with a system where we are melding ideas from our Talzorian and D&D into one system. But in order to make people digest the system more, we're going to go with the 3d18 system, but that's going to be insistent on making that 3d18 mean something. I mean, dexterity, man, do I really wish speed wasn't bound to species. We'll get into that in a second. The fact that why is speed, and the funny thing is, speed is always in increments of 5, and that always made sense because regardless of 5th edition divorcing itself away from the grid map, people still use the grid map, so everything has to be in 5-foot increments, and so having someone that's 1 foot faster didn't change anything. I don't know why I have tweezers in my hand. Doesn't really change anything. So it doesn't change anything until you get to 10 speed, right? Or 30 or 25 and so forth. So, but there's a part of me that wonders if dexterity. But also, that being said, it kind of depends on. And if we're adjusting, if we're assuming dexterity does affect speed, then dexterity can affect. It can, maybe the jump score affects your vertical jump distance, right? That maybe that without having to roll, you always can jump. Like if you have a 15, that's pretty nuts though. That's pretty nuts. Jumping 15 feet vertically if you had a 15 dexterity is superhero, but maybe vertical distance is score divided by 2. That's still pretty nuts because if you had you're looking at somebody with a 20 dexterity being able to jump straight up 10 feet, so that's not going to work. But horizontal distance, the only issue now, I can't spell nowadays. Horizontal jump is that once again we're dealing with someone that can. This is a running jump. This we'll say running jump instead of horizontal jump. Running jump. Once again, it's one of those situations where every single thing is an increment of a 5-foot increment, and that's the problem because DCs are not incremental. They're marginal, so they're 1, 2, 3, 4. But with movement, it's all in 5-foot steps. So everything is in 5-foot increments, regardless of if your group is using that or not. So creating a situation where there's a distance of 15 or 16 or 17 feet, it doesn't mean much. So we kind of have to go back on that, which is funny too because basically the way they do it is that you have a 20-foot jump and the DC is 18 to cross it. So they've taken the incremental value and turned it into a marginal number. And so I guess we can also say the same thing that why don't we blend acrobatics? Like we're talking about the fact that perception equals wisdom. Why in the world like athletics is a very bizarre skill. We got some people here. We're going to do that and get those out of the chat because somebody's already blopping on some stuff here. So I think we should do that. We should, like, athletics can sometimes blend between yeah, okay. So yeah, so I think that's a good idea. I think if we kind of remove acrobatics and we make acrobatics basically part of dexterity, in the same way Constitution's HP, intelligence is knowledge, we'll say that. Wisdom is perception. The thing about, going back to what I was saying about athletics is sometimes blurs the line between Constitution and strength. But there are strength checks. But there isn't a strength-based skill. I think acrobatics is basically dexterity with a skill attached to it. But athletics can be as much Constitution. But we'll say it's not. And say that because athletics is kind of based off of climbing, we can basically play with that. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a neat idea. Now, that being said, charisma actually has quite a bit of skills associated with it, and that's something that we may work in our favor. And I think we're getting somewhere. So when we're dealing with, of course, I have to look this up because I can't remember for the life of me the skills that are associated. Because charisma actually has a bunch of skills to it: deception, intimidated, performance, and persuasion. So if we're doing that, so if we associate strength with athletics, dexterity with acrobatics, Constitution with HP, because Constitution doesn't actually have any skills attached to it, intelligence with knowledge. Now they don't have knowledge there, but they have Arcana, history, investigation, nature. We're going to have knowledge. That's a 3.5 artifact, and we're going to kind of stick with it. And then we have wisdom, perception, and then charisma. At the end of the day, I wonder if that is a situation where we give people choice. See, is a division of casting related stats really necessary for thematic, though? Would a unified tertiary derived stat be better? You may have to explain that. Is a division of casting related stats really necessary for thematics? Would a unified tertiary derived stat be different? You're talking about having just a magical stat? The reason why I don't want to do a magical stat because I want to create a universal system that works with. So if I made ultra modern, I don't have a dead stat sitting there. So I do like the idea of magic being associated to one of these stats. That's just my justification. If I was doing an entirely fantasy-based setting, maybe I would have a psyche if this was a psyche-based system. Influence is pretty good, right? I kind of like influence, but I think I could go a little further because we have skills of this. Like, at the end of the day, what's the difference between deception and persuasion? I know I'm getting into semantics here. Performance is something else. You're acting. That's something. Intimidation and persuasion are very close. Persuasion, you're trying to convince somebody that you're friendly with, that you're trying to convince them in a very positive fashion. Where intimidation is very negative. You're trying to impose and intimidate them. But deception is a lie. So that's one thing about the charisma skills, that they're all very close to each other. Like, they're all within 1 degree. I mean, medicine, don't get me started on the fact that medicine's under wisdom, but like some of these skills are pretty close to each other. I can see why sleight of hand and stealth would be different. But it doesn't, but deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion. How about, to make charisma a bit more powerful, you get to choose a charisma skill. So, to reiterate, athletics is the basic rule for DC. So if you have a strength of 15, you always make DC 15 and less checks, right? And with acrobatics the same way. And I'm a person who does this stuff, so just bear with me. So if you had a dex of 15, you would make DC 15 under checks. And same thing applies to knowledge, that you would make, if you had an int, you would make DC 15 checks for knowledge. And we would just continue this process. We would say that same thing for a wisdom. But with here, you pick one of those skills. And that, I don't know why I did it that way, but that one, but you have to pick it. You have to choose it. So this one is choose a charisma skill from those 4. And that's neat because that basically tells you how you approach life. That becomes, and in many ways, and this is where things get interesting, you could play with that with backgrounds. Like, you could pick a background that says that your charisma DC becomes intimidation, because you had a background in wrestling. If you were an actor, you would get it. So maybe choose a TA skill, or it is bound to background. So unless your background tells you, then it's something you can choose maybe. So I like that. So I think that's kind of how we want to go from there. I saw that there are other skills like computer engineering, etc. Why the extra skills? We actually, for Ultramodern 5, we actually added fewer skills than most people would. A lot of games have added a crap ton of skills. We actually didn't add that many. We added computer work because I wanted a skill that dealt with electronics. I could have called it electronics. I called it computer operation. If I were to do it again, I would probably call it electronics, and we'd get to this point, I'll probably call it electronics, because electronics is not covered by our arcana, history, investigation, nature, or religion. It is a technical skill. That being said, computer work and engineering work are very different, which is the reason why engineering is also a skill. And that's a very broad skill. That's one thing we did. We made it very broad. That's why we don't have car mechanics and rocket engineering. We just have engineering because we need to keep things very generic compared to other games which would do that. And the same thing, we did that with sciences. Sciences, we have generic. We could have put in astronomy, astrophysics, and so forth, but we did it as a generic one because I didn't want to like, player characters are kind of superheroes, so they are going to be multiple skilled. So that's why, even though we didn't add as many skills as you might think. We added vehicle operation is a tool proficiency. We'll get into that, into proficiencies and tool proficiencies. I don't like tool proficiencies, how they did that. You have proficiencies, and we could have added a whole bunch. We didn't. We actually added very, very few. So unless there's objection, I'm going to leave that for now. So strength is also your base athletics DC. You can still roll it with your modifier, but if the DC is 15 or less, you don't have to worry. Same thing with acrobatics. HP will equal your hit points. We'll get into that in a second. So unless there's an objection, and I will go back to this if someone does bring this up. Okay. So we're dealing with these. We're dealing with the establishment of these numbers is a mechanic that they can't copyright, so we won't worry about that. And so that brings us to the next step, and the next step is going to be race or species. Now, one thing we volunteered in the new Amethyst is, and this has been a political thing. I don't want to get into big politics on this, folks, so I'm going to go over it really, really quickly. Let's assume things are species. The problem is that people say, well, species, you're dealing with racism and so forth. And the reason why that from a biological standpoint you can do that is because if we were to go back and make it a situation where Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, and Neanderthals were all basically in the same area, right? And let's say these are different species. If you picked Neanderthals, they would have physical, biological differences to humans. That is tangible and measurable. Neanderthals were generally, and this is weirdly true, they were generally more intelligent and they were stronger than the rest of us. And so you would reflect that. You would give them, say, a bonus to strength and a bonus to intelligence. Humans are unique. The reason why humanity survived over Neanderthals were because we were omnivores. And because we were omnivores, we could farm and cultivate and then generate communities, where Neanderthals were primary meat eaters, and as a result, they always had to hunt, so they couldn't form communities, and go on from there. Some people have actually said that Neanderthals weren't smarter, but some evidence says they were. But if you have Neanderthal DNA in humanity, which we have proven, that we've shown that there are Neanderthals DNAs in some humans, that those people have certain slight differences. So even if you have Neanderthal DNA, there's some differences that get factored into that, which I think is really interesting. So there is the precedent that if you are an elf, you could have biological differences that are measurable. You could have an intelligence score that increases or a dexterity score that increases. That being said, when you pick your species, it does have this tendency of narrowing your path. And as we can see with humanity and so forth, like I said, if we had an alien, you imagine an alien species that were physically very different than us would still have a broad range of occupations. You would still have people that were hunters and people who were scientists. But in the gamification of these rules, people go with trying to alpha game. And since the alpha game, they're going to try to make the advantage, which means if you have a +2 dex with your elf, you're always going to go into a dex-based class. So what I did in Amethyst, I created something that was, there was hereditary, hey, I'm going to say this, hereditary, oh God, hereditary, and trained. I knew I spelled that wrong. Thank you. Hereditary or trained. And what that meant is that, so actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you guys here. If we have a system, and I will do, and I'm not going to show you I could show you the page because I have it on my InDesign right now. And let's go into Origins. Do I have Quintessence open? Okay, I'm just going to bring this over here so you guys can see it. This is my build for Amethyst right now. This is for Amethyst Factions, which I'm working on. Amethyst Quintessence, its update already happened. So if you pick, this is the Ani. This is my my new race that gets introduced in that system, and you can see we have Ani traits, and we kind of formulated this in the same way the new 5.51 D&D is. It's not really a big deal. But you get some certain abilities automatically, certain things that are very unique to your species. In this case, dark vision, you're immune to disease, you can play dead, basically thematic stuff connected to the species that these are based on. You have advantages against being threatened and so forth. And then we have these regional focuses, similar to the Drow or the Dark Elf or High Elf. And so, but here you have hereditary abilities. If you elect to gain these abilities, you do not gain the trained abilities as part of your background. And that's where the ability score increases are now. And then you'll get certain other things, education and languages. If you pick, when you get to a background may give you some additional stuff automatically, but it will have trained abilities. Now, I do not know if we have a... Oh, yeah, we do have right here. So the background Kasika. So that one has trained abilities. So you'll get a couple things. You'll get equipment and so forth. But if you go to train abilities, if you elect to gain these abilities, you do not gain hereditary abilities as part of your species selection. And there we go. There you have another ability section. So by doing that, when you're doing this, you give the option for players to choose between whether or not they want to get their ability score from their species or from their background. And that gives them their ability to change who they are. So we're going into races. And, well, species, sorry. I have to train myself to get over that. And we're going to formulate them the same way. They're going to have equipment. They're going to have potentially equipment, training, skills, and so forth. But there will be these trained or abilities. That's going to be our contribution. I've already contributed that, added to that. It's something you could add to a 5e book without breaking any of the rules anyway. They went and they took the attribute bonuses out of species entirely, put it into backgrounds, and what I am saying is to do both. And you nailed it, Rye, perfectly. It's exactly what I'm talking about. I am talking about nature versus nurture. You took the word right out of my mouth. I was just going to say that. This is a nature versus nurture thing, and I am putting both of those in there. I'm going to go over a question. Wondering for 5e clones like Core D20 with a different license, are you opening to sharing work under different licenses you're okay with? If they're good with sharing their work under yours. Ultimately, this is something I'm doing completely free to the community. So ultimately, this is one thing I'll say this disclaimer. If we see stuff like this in any of the other new 5e variant clones that are going to come out thanks to the 1.1, like whatever we see coming out of this Black Flag, if we see any of these, then you can say, hey, we were all part of that. We helped contribute to that. You can say, I know exactly where they got that idea from. That's from that video that I helped contribute stuff to. So the other question here is, if you own Amethyst, will you get the update? Yes. If you own Amethyst Quintessence, you can go to your DriveThruRPG account right now and download it. If you did not get notified, that means you probably don't. It's either in your spam folder or you have indicated that you don't want to get emails from DriveThruRPG. And that's on you. But, yes, as of... I think December, I think it was Christmas Eve. I sent out the update. So if you go to DriveThruRPG and you go to your downloads, you will see the second edition of Quintessence. It's actually part of the same SKU. It is much smaller in like size, like the new program I'm using because I switched over to InDesign. It's a lot more efficient, and its layout matches factions. So factions is being rebuilt now. So it's going to look a little different, but not so much different. Quintessence looks like factions because I want those two and the new Revelations book to all look the same. So you will see a difference going there. So yeah, you can go to Quintessence right now and download, and you'll notice a few things. So yes, these rules, this hereditary and train stuff. That's a new thing that we've added to Quintessence. But more than that, I went and I took all of the updated rules from Ultramodern 5 Redo and put them into Quintessence. So Ultramodern, Quintessence had an early build of Ultramodern back from 2016, and it hasn't updated ever since. When we did Redo, we did a lot of updates. Quintessence now has all the stuff from Ultramodern 5 Redo, except for stuff that's completely unique to Ultramodern stuff, like the life path system and so forth. We brought the classes back over. However, one thing I did additionally in Quintessence is that I also updated the rules to the errata and made a few new changes. So the Quintessence is actually the most advanced version of Ultramodern we have to date. It's not only updated from Redo, but it also has all the stuff we learned that's in the errata. So if you have Quintessence and have Ultramodern, Quintessence actually has the better build. You have now been told. Without this come to Foundry module or Roll20. We are working on that right now, Ryu. Foundry, I don't know how long it's going to take. I have someone talking right now about Roll20. I was thinking for classes having something like Specialization, Focus, Mage, Elemental Specialization, Fire Focus. It would potentially be multi-level. Having something like Specialization, Focus, Mage. You may need to explain that a little bit more. It's the same thing as last time. Six consonants and no vowels, or 7 consonants, no vowels. You might have to explain that a little bit more. I think I know what you're talking about. We're just in races right now. So races are probably not, or species, sorry, are not going to change much other than this hereditary and trained option. But all that's doing is just giving people more options. And that's something I've always sworn to. I always like giving people options. So that's something we're going to be going through going forward. We're going to give people options, but the breakdown's going to be the same. You're going to get some skill proficiencies. You're going to get some other things. Whether or not, now it should be noted that if I do ever publish this, you're not going to see any proprietary stuff that I own. So you won't see Ladinians or Damascans in this. You will see Elf, Dwarf, and as another disclaimer, we're going with vanilla. We're going with vanilla. We're not going to be taking over, obviously, copyrighted stuff like Forgotten Realms or what have you. Some people told me that Drow isn't copyrighted. I don't know. But we will have Elf, Dwarf, and they will be the cliched vanilla versions of those. So it's the Dwarf that we know, the Elf that we know. That's just a disclaimer. We're not going to talk about that, really. Because at the end of the day, we could carry over the Elf rules verbatim. That being said, when we get down to it, yeah, so Elf traits in 5th edition right now, Dark Vision, Speed, Keen Senses. I mentioned earlier that I don't know if I really agree with Speed having that system, having Speed based off of your species selection. And there's a part of me that wants to make it based off of an attribute. I mean, like, for example, what if, and this is just spitballing here, should speed be based off of athletics or dexterity? I think that obviously it's going to be dexterity, even though technically it shouldn't be. But let's say it's dexterity. You can create a situation right here and say that you can have a variable. You can do this. This is obviously carried over AD&D by saying the fact that that if your dex is like, let's go underneath here. If your dex is like 3 to let's do it in threes. So 3 to 5. No, that's not gonna be. Let's do 5 maybe. We'll do 4. We'll do 4. If you're is that, then your speed is 20 or maybe even 15. I know someone's gonna say it's based off of size. We'll get to that. I'm just spitballing here. And then 8 to 12 is going to be 20. 13 to 17, you're dealing with 25. I'm already probably not looking at this right. This is probably going to be 20. This will be 25. This will be 30. And then 18 to, say, 22 will be 35. And then 23 and up, you'll be 40. Now, that's one thing you could do. Now, someone's going to say, obviously, that size category matters. That somebody who's small, even if they're agile, but that's something we can adjust on its own. Like, you can have speed go up and down based off of this, but you can say something like this. And I'm going to do the same thing with Constitution. Work with me on this. Because species are going to go through attribute bonuses, we're not going to muck around with these sort of thing. But this is not a bad, I don't think this is a bad idea. Right? 3 to 7 is 20 feet. And like I said, the variables can change. I don't want it to go above 40 unless you have a ridiculously high dexterity, 23 up, which is very difficult to do. So, and the funny thing, of course, is the fact that size category can change it, but that's an entirely separate thing. You can say that size category, and I don't know. I know in one of the books, size categories does actually have a rule for adjusting speed. So that tiny is negative 10 feet. Small is negative 5. Medium is 0. Large is plus 5, and so forth and so forth. And I'm just going to just explain that. So we can have speed adjusted by dex plus size. And you can do that. So that's one thing. I'm gonna put that down there just because we'll get to that because it's we'll see how far we can get today. Let's see here. Based off size and have a size range for each species. Yes and no. The issue is that the way they define large is insane. Like when you go from small to medium, the size difference between small and medium isn't much, but the difference between medium and large is gigantic. Remember that a medium and a small person both occupy a 5-foot space, but the moment you go to large, they occupy a 2x2 square, a 10-foot space, and there's no human being that's large, and that's one thing about. That's always been an issue. So we may not play around with that. Smaller, yes, but not larger. Because of due to other video games entertainment, some races can't be copyrighted. Speed doesn't seem to be a stat-based strict of dex. What if speed is based off of dex plus con with a mod from size? Flatfoot. That's actually not a bad idea. Having something now for those people who don't know, 4th edition did give you the option. It didn't take 2 attributes, but it did take. That's really smart, actually, Flatfoot. I really like that. It didn't. It said that your reflex defense could be derived from 1 or 2 sources, and they did that very specifically so that you wouldn't have dumb stats and you could be strong in different qualities. And if I remember correctly, going into ability scores here. Your will defense was either wisdom or charisma. And that's really cool. I'm not saying we're going to be adopting that, whether or not we're going to be playing with saving throws. But I really like that. Now, in 5th edition, every saving throw is connected to an attribute. So there was a wisdom saving throw, a charisma saving throw, and so forth. But we could talk about going back to the old school of having a a saving throw. Now, I'm not going to do the defense value because that's going to really bring up a lot of issues. But what if, instead of there being an int whiz saving throw, that there was a will saving throw that was either derived from charisma or wisdom? And then you had a dex saving throw. Or sorry, reflex. It'd be reflex saving throw. Reflex saving throw. That was either based off of, what was the other one anyway? It was intelligence. That's what it was. So dex or int contributed to reflex saving throw. I really like that. We'll put that on the type side. Let's go back talking about what Flatfoot said about using it. So the fact that dex plus con. I don't want to do dex plus strength. So that's gonna have some people just running off. But I do like dex plus con, and that becomes a value that creates your speed value. Now that people say that's very complicated. That's like really confusing. But in that same context, you only need to do it once. And you can adjust either your con or your dex to potentially increase your speed. So there is an argument to do something like that. But if we do that, I like the idea of doing that for a couple of other things. Like maybe hit points is derived from con and strength. Maybe. I mean, why not? I mean, that's something you could think of. You could say strength plus con equals hit points. But that being said, that removes the importance of Constitution here. So that being said, this could also be your resistance to stuff. So your resist for saving throws. I mean, obviously, the con saving throw is one of the most commonly used saving throws out there. So this could be resist to disease and con conditions, for example, because we can create a term called. I mean, we're not going to call it resistance, and we're not going to call it immunity. I mean, what could you call something like that? Maybe. Oh dear, that's tough. And this is just me spitballing. I'm probably never going to return to this. It could be. Oh man. Oh, we'll get back to that, but I don't want to get too far into this. So, but that's something to consider. That fact that Dex Con can create speed and Strength Con equals your hit points, and then Constitution could be a resist to disease and so forth. That if a disease, and this is perfectly logical, if you have a con of 15, you pass all DC 15 con saves. Your immune system is so powerful, it automatically works. Right? Let's see here. Yeah, speed adjustments. Yeah, so you could have speed adjustments based off of the species. That remains to be seen. Once again, dwarf -5, elf +5. We can play with that. Absolutely. This is a situation where you create these wonderful variations that create characters that are entirely useful. Vitality could be a play. Oh, there we go. You nailed it right there. We can call it vitality. Thank you. Perfect. Great. Endless tide. Good job. So going back to what we said there, so strength con equals hit points, dex con equals speed. That being said, con's being used in 2 occasions, and I kind of don't like that. Con has to be hit points, but the problem is there's only 3 attributes, right? So you're going to have one that's carrying over between 2 of them. But the question is that could wisdom and charisma add together and stuff like that? And this is one of those situations where it may come to a situation where I don't want to have people dumping all of their stats into physical stuff. And there could be the belief that maybe in charisma together creates something. We've got more trolls again. 1 second, folks. There we go. So hopefully those won't pop up, folks. I believe I got that right. Hopefully I intercept these these trolls before con squared. Con plus con. No. But something to think about. Potentially, since we're in races, this is actually part of attributes. So we'll put that back up here. So I kind of like this, but I'll mention it. I'll tell you right now where I'm going with this. I want to create a situation where classes don't determine your hit points as much as you think they should. There's a part of me that wants to say, if you're a fighter with a 14 constitution and you're a wizard with 18 constitution, why doesn't the wizard have more hit points? I know it comes from entirely a combat perspective, but maybe we just do modifiers. Yeah, everyone has the idea that everyone has to have a die. And I think we're still going to have the die, but maybe we reward people. And once again, I think first level hit points, for example, could be something that's derived from strength and constitution. Now, originally, the idea is that your con score equaled your hit points, and then this is something that was carried over from 4th edition. If we add strength into the play, yeah, see, that's a problem. I going back to what Flat Out was mentioning about con, and the issue is it creates a situation that's entirely unique to one situation. And there's a part of me, I mean, yes, they get the acrobats. So at this point, it seems like the ability scores so far throughout all of them now entirely are base DCs. I like that. So these are all the value gives you a skill, and I like that. So and then we have these derivative. We'll call them derivative, which is your speed, which is based off of Dex and Con, your hit points, which is based off of Strength and Con. But what other things do we have in a class that creates a situation? Now, someone's going to say spellcasting. And I think that's something that we could probably take a look at. Go classless. Trust me, Rye, I thought about it, but I do know from a psychological standpoint, people like filling a role. And charisma is the con of the mind. So, for example, and this is something I'm going to say right now, I think D&D has too many spellcasters. They did that because they wanted to have a spellcasting class for every single attribute. They had a charisma spellcaster, they had a whiz spellcaster, they had an int spellcaster. And then they had ones that were either or. I mean, I think like Bard is charisma, isn't sorcerer charisma as well? And you could create a situation where maybe we create spellcasting classes that are based off of 2 attributes instead of 1. Like, for example, what if a wizard was int plus whiz, cleric was whiz plus charisma? And people are going to say, well, what a bard? I don't want Bard to be a spellcaster. We'll get to that. I have no problem creating a situation where we have 2 spellcasting classes, a wizard and a cleric, end of list. What about druid? Maybe druid is something. The problem is there's not a lot of, druid. I mean, druid, because we have intelligence so forth. We get druid could be even be constitution even. You could say that druid could be constitution and wisdom. We don't have to be bound to that. That being said, I prefer the idea of making, like, let's get out of the idea of every spellcasting class working exactly the same. Like, why do we have a spell list of 300 spells that every class has access to most of them, and they all operate the same way? I know it's easy, but why don't, like, this is something for people who know me, knows that I've been doing this stuff with Affinity. Affinity is 3 books, and every one of them has a completely different spellcasting system. There's no fancy magic system in any of those systems. One uses deck building, one uses paper. When I do the new spell casting, now that being said, I still have spell lists, but they're different and unique for each one. But when I did the Psyker class called the Maker in Conestoga, I threw that out entirely and created something that was based off of video games, specifically Druid, Wiz plus Charisma. Oh, clear a lot of Cleric. I think the problem is that there's always been this association of wisdom and religion, and that's why I think, I mean, a wizard should be int wiz, cleric should have charisma. I can see the druid being wiz charisma as well, but I think druids are always known being hermits and people that don't talk to people that much, like Obi-Wan Kenobi and so forth. So there's a part of me that doesn't want druid to be associated with charisma. So we'll get back to that, but going back to what I was saying, maybe wizard and cleric are the only classes that use that system that we know and love. Maybe bard and druid don't. Maybe they have a completely different system that they play off of. That being said, it still may use attributes, so we may have to go back on this. But I think for spellcasting, maybe wizard and cleric are derived from 2 attributes instead of 1. So rogue spellcaster is dexterity plus wisdom. But yeah, once again, we create a situation where, and this is some of those points about multi-classing. I've always been really against the 40 different types of spellcasting that makes D&D so spell forward. The fact that half their classes have access to spells. They do it in different means, but the processes of doing it is exactly the same. And it gets a little monotonous after a while. Now, in Amethyst Revelations, new book coming out, I actually do combine. I have one spellcaster, and um, and four martial classes, and the martial classes are meant to be plays on what we know already. So I don't have a fighter. My fighter is, I think, my fighter is. I have it's like my monk, for example, is a fighter monk. It's a melding of monk and fighter, so it doesn't have the pseudo Tibetan spiritual stuff of the monk. It is a bare knuckle boxer with some fighting abilities. It's called a brawler, and we spun the bard into rogue and called him a charlatan. And I won't go into too many details, but the idea is that we're combining two classes that are normally separate and creating a much more variable class. You can create something much more interesting. And I'm not saying we're going to do that now. We're probably still going to have the classes as we recognize them so people don't get freaked out. From your spell ID, you could have spells associated with each group. So if you want undead spells, you need to go down the necromancer path. That's if we're going to do a necromancer and so forth. I still like the idea. I mean, wizard, people get angry if wizard doesn't follow the Vancian system. But I don't think people will complain if we create a new variation. Like I said, Paladin and Ranger won't have spells. Sorry, I just gotta... I mean that sincerely. I don't think Ranger and Paladin should not be spellcasters. I'm going to say that right now. I don't want... if you guys object, please say so. But I'll be surprised if any of you say, no, absolutely, we should have the same spellcasting system for Ranger, Paladin, Druid, Bard, Wizard, Sorcerer. I mean, it gets a little monotonous. So one thing about 4th edition is that everyone was entirely self-enclosed. But the idea of necromancy being part of wizardry, I think it's a good idea. The issue, of course, is how do you create a situation where cleric and wizard do feel different? One of them is the fact that they have a different spell list and so forth. They have healing and so forth, and they can turn and power and go undead. But I can see your idea that instead of doing wizard cleric, we create 4 completely unique, evocator, necromancer, healer. And I'm starting to like that idea more and more because one thing people know about me with Amethyst is that it is agnostic. And that's kind of very important. And that's we don't necessarily have to have this conversation now, but if we create a situation, do we need to have gods in our setting? Do we need to impose a religious ideology within our setting? We're not doing a setting, but if we're creating a universal system, do we have to force religion and religious powers into that rule set? I think that's an important conversation that we need to have, that maybe that we do that. We create a situation where that you could be a healer or a necromancer or an evocator, and they have their own little necromancer. Can't spell necromancer nowadays. Remove gods 100%. Thank you, Rye. I think so that could be a situation where you can have a caster, and that could have multiple paths, right? And that gives you access to the powers of healing. The necromancer turns undead. Why doesn't the necromancer actually, no, I think the necromancer does turn undead. But why, let's create situations where if I am a necromancer, there's something very unique about that. Now, I'm not saying we're going to have one caster, but we can have a situation where we have the casters, and the casters will be the healer. That being said, people are going to get angry if their healer only does healing. So we'll have a situation where you can have do we put healing with necromancy? Oh, that's tough. Because Evocator's your combat caster. That solves its own problem, right? You can have an illusionist. And this illusionist could have anything from summoning to, obviously, illusion. You can have an enchanter. I don't want to put too many. I think 4 is basically the limit. So we gotta have to create something where we don't maybe call a necromancer by its name. Maybe we have a life person, and that could be positive or negative life. You can have an enchanter, And that is, of course, like everything that's enchanting. We have that, and so forth. But the life one, and the other thing, of course, is that we don't necessarily have to have the casters be. We're getting into classes, and I didn't want to do that just yet, folks. We're still dealing with it, but we don't necessarily need to have the situation where casters are completely but useless in combat, especially if we create a situation where your hit points are derived by strength and constitution, where you can suddenly have that. Now, we'll talk about ladders in a second, where situations where could I go into Evocator as a different ability. We'll go into that later, potentially, but because I don't know whether or not we want to bring ladders from Ultramodern into this. So we'll put that on the back burner for now. But the idea of losing clerics and losing gods out of the setting, I think that might be a good idea. It makes sense that clerics have something akin to spells, blessings that they confer from their gods. Yeah, there is that point. Now, in Amethyst, I let people have clerics in the agnostic setting, but I said that you could be an atheist cleric because it's about being naturally gifted with these abilities. And we could create a situation where there are these naturally imbued magical people. But we'll go into that because I don't want this to be setting specific. Okay, well, going back here very quickly. Speed, Dex Con, and then spell casting. So the mental stats will be spellcasting, because Dex and Strength are automatically associated with combat anyway. Okay, so we're getting into the point where now we see here that 5e had saving throws for all of them. I think we actually can make an argument by eliminating those saving throws. What if gods were just a background choice for casters? That's a very good point. I'm not saying we're saying you can't put gods in the setting. I just don't think gods should be a mechanical aspect. And that was always my issue with Amethyst, which is the reason why I took them as a mechanical aspect out of Amethyst. And in fact, all my game settings I ever create are always agnostic because I am not a religious person. So I think by saying, like, we're not telling you can't be religious. You can be a religious fighter. We're just saying that we're not making gods a mechanical aspect of our setting, because I don't want to necessarily force people down that road, especially in our growing community. Back in the 80s, 95% of the population was religious, and now it's down to like 30 or 40. There's so many people who are non-practicing or agnostic or atheist, and it's one of those situations where we kind of excuse that situation. And then having a situation here where we're not going to force people down that path. Because also you have situations of people who are devoutly religious, who are Muslim or Christian, that say, I don't want to be playing a setting where I'm worshiping somebody else other than the God I actually believe in. So I think if we divorce religion out of the setting, it happens sometimes. I get this really itchy nose if I'm on a live stream. I don't know why. So mental spellcasting, we're going to like no gods. So we will associate that. So we're going back to saving throws. So saving throws very specifically, I don't think people are going to complain if we remove them all and we just have, what are we going to have? We had a will saving throw, a reflex saving throw, and a vitality saving throw. Is that what we were thinking of, or is that something else we were thinking of? Fortitude, that's what it was. Fortitude, that was fortitude. So we're using the same terminology, but we're not making them static defenses. So these are still saving throws, which means they are a variable. So if we do a variable like this, saving throws, will, reflex, fortitude, that means we're actually making things easier. We're eliminating these 5, in this case 6 because of vigor, and we're creating a situation where there's only 3 saving throws. But there's still saving throws, a modifier, not a static defense, which is what 4th edition did. And that way we can have a situation where will, as before, is either, what would we say? It was wisdom or charisma. So charisma or wisdom made will. Reflex was int or dex. And fortitude was con or strength. Right? Yeah, okay, that's it. Spirit save, mind save, body save. Okay. Rye, have you played the Spirit, soul, say. No, funny is when you say body, mind, and spirit, I'm going to go back to Apocrypha. Apocrypha is a fantastic card game that if you that uses those abilities. It has body, mind, spirit, and I can't remember what the fourth one is, but they actually use body, mind, and spirit. And in case you're wondering what Apocrypha is the better version of the Pathfinder adventure card game. I've said it. Okay, so. To make things easier, let's stick with will, reflex, and fortitude, and use that for saving throws. I like that because it makes things so much easier. And also, if you want to adapt a 5e monster, anytime it says an int or dex save, it's actually referring to reflex. If it's a con or strength save, it means fortitude. Apocrypha, never heard of it. You're not wrong. No one's heard of it. But anyway, so the game company, something Shark Games, who did some stuff with Penny Arcade, they made a game called the Pathfinder Adventure Card Game. A lot of people know about this. There's a crap ton of expansions. But oddly enough, that was their second game. It came out first, but the original system, that is the Pathfinder Adventure Card Game, was another game called Apocrypha, which is a fantastic game because it's an urban horror game, and there are not a lot of board games that use that urban horror, like that kind of X-Files type setting. It's fantastic. It's it's like a 10 out of 10. Honestly, I think I named it my #1 game of all time. It's actually, I think it's better than Gloomhaven, and people I know who play it prefer to play that over Gloomhaven, but it is not an easy game to grok. It is not an easy game to learn. There's no good rule sets. If you go to Dice Tower or even my channel and you see an Apocrypha review, I made that review, but that is one of the few situations where you can learn the game using a video. I actually think my video on Apocrypha is the best way to learn the game. Okay. Anyway, I do love the game. People are going to say, I played this game and I hate it. If you like the Pathfinder Adventure card game, I think Apocrypha is better. It has better dice management. It's got a really neat setting, and it has insanely crazy expansions. We're not talking about that. We're talking about this system. I don't want to get off topic. Okay, so I want to keep that unless anyone has any objections to that. I actually always had issues with six different saving throws. Let's stick it back to 3 and have it be derived, and so we don't hit people over the head with it. Static defense versus save mathematics the same. You just change who rolls the dice from attack defense. Endless Night, I love you so much. I have been saying this for a long time. 4th edition was written with GMs in mind. Right? The monsters were easy to create. The adventures were easy to run. It put a lot more complexity in the player's hands, which is the reason why the player's handbook is so freaking huge. But with 4th edition, though, it put it in the DM's. It put more rolling and ownership on the players, and that made the job of the DM easier. The problem with 4th edition is the jarring juxtaposition of moving from a mind game to a tabletop game. And I was talking about this with Frederick Wheeler just yesterday. The fact that the one problem with 4th edition is that you had to set up the tabletop. You could be playing, hey guys, you want to roll this, want to do this, I want to talk to this guy, I want to persuade this guy. We're in combat, roll initiative, create the tabletop. 13th Age, which is a fantastic 4E variant system, played with this. It took the 4th edition architecture and created a new system that did not need to have the board. But I think they went too vague because it's a very vague system. But the one thing that they did in 4th edition is that they made the ownership of rolling on the players. GM will send 15, 20 monsters to you. Okay, I cast Fireball, and then the GM has to go, son of a bitch, I have to roll 15 freaking times, and we all have to wait. And the player's like, well, it doesn't matter to me. I'm casting a spell. The GM has to do all the rolling. But I'm like, okay, well, their reflex defense is 15. You have to now roll it 15 times. We're all waiting on you instead of the GM to do those rolls. We put that ownership on them, and I always appreciated that. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to do that. We're going to have an AC, a will defense, a reflex defense, and a fortitude defense. I think it's because if people see that, they're going to go, this is just like 4th edition. I'm not against it, and like you said, it's just the way it's presented. You can turn a will saving throw into a will defense by simply taking the modifier and adding 10. Let's be honest, that's all that you need to do. But if we go down that route, you're setting a precedent, and you're also making this really less compatible with 5e, and I'm trying to create a situation where this is an evolution of 5.75, and not 4.75. So I think we'll keep saving throws as a modifier for now, even though I'm generally on the side for GMs. So that's saving throws. We talk about here about proficiency bonus, and we know that in proficiency bonus with 5e, the proficiency bonus is entirely a bonus is fixed based on level. It is not in any way based off of your class. That's going to stay the same. That's going to stay the same. I think that's going to stay the same. I never liked the idea. I like the idea of letting everyone have attack rolls, whether it be an int attack roll or a dex attack roll, so forth. Everyone has the same attack roll. That's a good idea in 5th edition. That's not something, and I do believe that was also taken directly from 4th edition. I think only, was it 3.5 that did that, or was it the old edition? I do believe, yeah, give you an idea how long it's been since I've played. I always said people that I can never keep a system in my mind. Yeah, so the sorcerer, yeah, so their base attack bonuses were different based off of the class. Okay. I think the way 4e did was to just keep the dice in the player's hands who turn it so it didn't roll when it wasn't your turn. I've seen where the GM sets the difficulty and everything, including stats, was used to modify the difficulty and players roll a single die. Players may actually object if you have like 10 monsters and you make one roll and they all make it. So it ends up being a situation where you end up having to roll it. How about a save pool? Players decide how many dice apply to make a save in advance to the roll, and the number of dice as the save pool is influenced by stats and character level. Okay, I'm going to read that again. How about a save pool? Players decide how many dice to apply to make a save in advance of the roll, and the number of dice in the save pool is influenced by stats. Right, that's a neat idea. I don't think it's a good mechanic to add here. I do like the idea of the GM having a bunch of pre-made rolls. That's something a lot of GMs do anyway. Like we'll have sometimes I'll have back before passive perception, we had players make a bunch of perception rolls ahead of time so they didn't know when I was going to use them. Wright says, drop proficiency bonus. It's a defining feature of 5e. No, not necessarily. We've had bonuses. We may not call them. I just realized this player's handbook isn't mine. Let me explain why I have two of them. They had a proficiency bonus, and they had the base attack bonus. Now, I don't have a problem calling it proficiency bonus. And once again, talking about the D&D Next rules that I had access to, they did not have a proficiency bonus, and it was mechanically flawed because at that point, the D20 was too much of a variable. It was too much. Players like to roll dice. Yes, right, players like to roll dice a lot. And once again, just like we were saying earlier, who is it, flat out or endless? You can easily change this from a modifier to a static, just by adding 10. So this is not something that we are hard bent locked on, but I think we can all agree that we are combining charisma, wisdom into one saving throw, index into one saving throw, and con strength into one saving throw. I think we can all agree on that. Now, on to proficiency bonus. Now, obviously, 3.5 had the base attack bonus. We're going to go away from that. I have Pathfinder here. I don't know why I don't open that, because that's a slightly better evolution. But they do the same thing. They have a base attack bonus, and that I imagine changes with each class. What did 4th edition call it? Did they call it how did they do it? Did they, I mean, I wrote for the system and I can't remember it now. So fighter, yeah, so their attack is strength versus AC. And did you add your level? I'm trying to remember how you guys did attack bonuses back then. Bugger hell. I cannot remind myself how they did attack bonuses. How did the attacks? Because I don't know why I just don't go with the forget how big that section is. So when you're making the attack, yeah, we'll get to actions in a bit, but range attack, blah blah blah, projectile weapons, so forth, attack types. I'm trying to remember, how did they do that? Yeah, we have dual. Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. The attack's power base attack bonus. So they did have a base attack bonus back then. And is the base attack bonus based off of your level? Oh no, it was half your level, wasn't it? It was half your level. That's what it was. Oh, Endless Night, you just answered my question. Sorry. I should probably read the comments before I get to my answer. Players like roll dice. Okay, there was a skirmish war game I played where you had a pool of pre-rolled dice you could draw from instead of rolling. Not sure. And then we have you added your half level. That's what it was. It was half level. You were at second level you got a +1. So they did have it. So we could still play with it and have it, call it the attack bonus or a base attack bonus, and still have it reminiscent to 3.5. But that attack bonus won't be half level. It'll probably be similar to what we saw with the proficiency bonus. And the reason why I still want to do the proficiency bonus is, once again, we need to mitigate the randomness of the D20 roll. So base attack bonus, everyone starts the same. You can see +2, and then it goes up from there. Not too dissimilar to probably exactly the same as the way 5e did it. We're not going to mess around with additional attacks and stuff like that. Base attack bonus will be fixed. It'll be based off of the player's handbook from 4th edition, but it'll probably have the same values as 5th edition. Can we link base attack bonus to dual stats like earlier with the saves? Huh. Okay. Oh, man. I'm trying to understand exactly how that would work. I think I might know what you're talking about. Are you saying that... okay. Just before I look at the comments, if you do answer, I think what we may be referring to is a situation where you add two values together for your base attack bonus. Now that could throw things a little out of whack, just because the base attack bonuses for characters... Oh, that's still... wrong book. I mean, that's idea is not terribly bad. It can get out of control if you're not careful. Because, let's say this is not mechanically possible. We can try to avoid this best we can. But if you had a situation where your strength and your dexterity, if you were a fighter and your base attack bonus was based off of the strength and dexterity, and you added those together, you could have a +9 bonus at first level. And you could say that, the only issue then is that you're forcing players down that one line. You're making a situation where this is something we did with Ultramodern, where you can do something as easy as your top highest attribute scores are your base attack bonus, and not even say what they are. You can just simply say your top 2 attribute bonuses, you add them together. Or you could be a real ass about this and say your top and your bottom are added together. That could be really annoying. But I can see, let's talk about this for a second. Let's create this. This is option 1, just a flat proficiency bonus. This is option 1. Option 2, let's put that there, is that we combine attributes as we did before. And this could be something that is definitive of this system, where everything is derived from these values instead of flatly approaching things. Where you combine attributes. Now, the issue, of course, is that could get out of control. But this could be the situation where we stop people from making extremely polarizing characters. Now, somebody may say, I want a polarizing character. I want a character with a 22 strength and a 2 intelligence. I want that. And that might greatly, really heavily affect how monsters are made. Because, once again, you could have a horse with a 3 int and a 14 dex, or an 18 strength, and because of his int, he gets that technically he would be buggered. Like, wait a second, the fighter, the horse, has an arbitrarily higher attack bonus than a fighter because the horse has an int of 3. So although the idea, I really love the idea, and someone's going to say, we'll make monsters different. And the problem is no, we have to create a situation where monsters and players are cut from the same cloth. Right? The other issue is... Yeah. So polarized stat characters, people like having, people want that option. If we say that your attack bonus is based off of your high and your low, that balances itself, but it creates a situation where it forces us to even our character's ability stats and not have extremes, and it also screws over monsters. So combining attributes is still not a bad idea. It can't be the positive negative, but if we have it be your top 2, that could create a situation, once again, where it could be your strength and your int, or your dex and your con. Yeah, you're right. It should be everything based on the same mechanic. That's absolutely true. So if you do it off the top 2, then we create a situation where your base attack bonus can be kind of crazy. But the other thing that this is important, the reason why that they put in a fixed proficiency bonus is the fact that it creates a predictable power creep. And what I mean by that is the fact that you're going to be compelled to, if, for example, your fighter, and the fighter says your base attack bonus is based off of the best of your 2 stats. If we do that for everybody, all base attack bonuses are based off your top 2 stats, regardless of its class. Let's say that. And let's say for fighter, you've made a fighter that's a strength dex. And let's say you have, a 16 and an 18. And so those add up together and you get +7. Now that's not an impossible plus. If you go to what a first character, let's say if a first level character had an 18 dex, their attack bonus would be +6. So that wouldn't be a huge variation. We're only looking at +1 or so. Now that being said, it should not be. Someone may go, well, in that case, that may encourage extremes. Average the top 2. Yeah, but that creates a situation where now it gets too low. I want to create a system that once again, we could create a situation. Because I do want to create a situation where people can take a 5e monster. Because that's the one thing. You could take a 3.75 monster and drop him into a 3.5. And the whole point of playing around and the idea of being 5.75 is to create a situation where someone can look at it and go, I only need to change 2 or 3 numbers. And if we create a situation where it averages the top 2, hey, Square Peg, if you do something that's the top 2, you create a situation where it's the opposite. If we do it the highest and lowest, you eliminate the polarization. If you have it be the top 2, you enforce polarization because that person is going to put their highest attributes in their 2 big combat stats, regardless of what that may be. Now, we want to be able to encourage people to do both, to do either polarization or evening out. So there is an argument to try to find some kind of balance that allows people to create both ways. So if we average out the top 2, you're still forcing people down that line. And it's not going to be a gestalt of the whole value, because the whole value should be exactly the same. So, I mean, one of the ways to building a character is the fact that you have a pool of numbers that you're moving around. And the averaging the top 2 will be a situation where the attack score just becomes static. Now, the thing about averaging all modifiers is that everyone's going to have the same modifier. Everyone's going to have the same one, and no one's going to be different. So I also like, and this is something we did with the idea of the fact that your combat attack modifier can be different based off of what you do. And that's something we did with ladders. Your ladder told you what your primary attack modifier was going to be, whether it be strength, intelligence, dexterity, and so forth. And by letting people have that option, we give 6 potential options instead of 3. If we average it out, then we're limiting what people are. We limit that creativity for characters. So although I like the idea of playing with the idea of combining attributes, I don't know if it's going to give the end result or it may alienate people who want more creative control over their character. So yeah, it's a very interesting idea, but I don't know whether or not that's going to really work. The idea of combining attributes. I like it, but I think maybe some weapons require strength and some require dex. I do believe we've been through that. I do believe that was in the old edition. Level plus top mod. Yeah. The first thing we could do is mess with that. Now, the one thing with 5th edition is that they didn't let the proficiency modifier go crazy. Like I said, it only goes up by 1 every 4 levels, and it tops out at 6. Now, 4th edition did half level. And so you got, at 30th level, you were at high 15. You had 10 at 20th level. So that can get crazy. That can really scale. 4th edition, the character classes were even, but they were radically outpowering for other characters. Where in 5th edition, a 6th level character and a 4th level character weren't terribly different. You still had the power creep between wizard and fighter, but that's something that we may, that'll be the age-old debate. But when we're looking at the proficiency bonus, there's a part of me that thinks that we still stick with a static proficiency gain so that everyone's the same. I don't want to make it class-based. And adding your attribute bonus to it is a good idea, and having it be your highest attribute. I mean, you proficiency level is your level divided by 3 rounded up. Yeah, I mean, that's an easy thing. I mean, 20th level, that basically is the standard setup, right? Your proficiency bonus is basically level, and that doesn't throw things completely out of a level divided by 3 rounded up. And that creates an interesting situation because, yeah, it means that you have a proficiency bonus of +1 at 1st level, where everyone else, 5th edition, has a +2. Let's see. Okay. That means you wouldn't get it till 4th level, which is consistent. That means you'd be staying at +1 all the way to 4th level. And at 4th level, you go to +2. And at 6th level, you'd go to +3. Yeah, so it's slightly different. Yeah, and 30 would be +10. That's not a bad one, actually. It doesn't throw things completely out of whack. So we have 2 options. One is proficiency bonus from 5e that doesn't change. Or option 2, which is your level divided by 3 rounded up. So we'll go with that. We'll go with those 2, and we'll return to that in a little bit. I don't want to be here all day. I want to do one more aspect, and then we will end it. And if you guys like it, and if the people who are watching and the people who've tuned in after the fact want to play around with this again, maybe we'll do this as a weekly thing. Maybe we'll do this again. Because I have ideas. I have ideas we haven't even got to. So we've played around with that. We've played around with this proficiency bonus. Let's talk about hit points. Now, I just said that hit points would be your con score. And we also mentioned that hit points would be strength plus con. So strength plus con. Now, that can really create a crazy first level situation. Now, that would be obviously modifiers, right? That would be con modifier plus strength modifier, right? So you would have a situation where, now that being said, and this is something that I want to throw by you guys. Has anyone ever reached level 30? 4th edition, my 4th edition game, yes. I did a 4th edition Amethyst game. Back when Amethyst was sorting 4th edition, we totally had 30 level characters. Maybe attack stores start at -5. Ugh, I don't know if I'll get into that. People like positives. They don't like negatives. That's why everyone tries their everything to get above the 10 on their attribute score. So what I want to try to do, Hit points from 5th edition, hit points at first level is your maximum of your hit die plus your con modifier. What if we had a situation where the majority of your hit points came from your ability score? So your con modifier plus your strength modifier, let's say, whatever that case that may be, like, 4, and a good example, like 4 plus 2 or whatever, and it could be up to plus 6. What if... This is going to be stupid. I know you guys are going to say this is a dumb idea. What if instead of your modifiers, what if your con... Well, we'll keep that as an option 1, but what if your con and your strength determined your hit die? I know this is going to be controversial. I want people to think about that. What if your class didn't define your hit die? What if your attribute scores did? And that could be a situation where you could then have Rock the Spellcaster. Right? That's something to think about. Like, was it Conan the Sorcerer? Conan the Librarian, or whatever it may be. Because this will be the last one we'll talk about today, is talking about hit points. But, I mean, we have a situation here. Hit points can either be con score plus die, con strength mod plus die. But in this situation, it would be middle die. Or, average die would be what I wanted to say. Or con strength mod equals average die. So, and unlike 5e, where you get the maximum die roll, it's your strength constitution plus. So, in case of fighter, for example, it would be, for example, if you had a strength of 18, you'd have a 4, and you had a con of 16, you'd have a 3, and then instead of 10, you would get 5. And so your hit points would be 12. That puts you at a little bit less hit points. So that might not work because we want to kind of keep hit points pretty good. That being said, giving them a full die gets them to a higher value. Now, that's not so bad, giving people a few extra hit points. I mean, we're only looking at 3 or 4 extra hit points. It's not a huge thing. So if we give them a full die, then we create a situation where something like that, suddenly you have 17 hit points instead of 14 or 15. So as your scores improve, does that also mean your hit die can also improve as you reach higher levels? That sounds kind of neat. It does, actually. It is. I think that's a neat idea. Like, why is it when you go from an 18 to a 20 constitution, you only get a marginal increase? Like, that should be something that's kind of big. But that being said, we're putting a lot of ownership in Constitution, because we're basically saying Constitution is the end-all, be-all of everything. Once again, this could be a situation. Now, someone's going to say, you guys remember the whole adage that if you had an 18 AC based off of Dex, your hit points were about your resistance to damage, and you could create a situation where your hit die was determined by your highest physical stat, not necessarily Constitution. That creates a very interesting situation, because at that point, it becomes not necessarily Constitution. It becomes something that's based off of whatever is your highest stat, strength, con, or dex. Your hit points are based off of that. And then maybe your hit points and so hit the highest physical stat, it determines your die and your hit points, basically. You like that one, right? Hopefully, unfortunately, I'm always like, it's like 15-second delay, so I don't know if you're liking the first idea or this one. So if we create a situation like that, you can have a situation where not only does it increase your hit die, it increases your modifier as well. So you can have a situation, in fact, Why don't we go one further and create a situation? Let's, for example, let's say 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 values for your physical stat. 14 gives you your +2 modifier, but 15 gives you the die 6, right? So maybe 13, and I'm throwing numbers out here, but D4, D6, 16's +3, 17 gives you the D8, 18 gives you the +4. So when you move your attribute, even if you don't change your modifier, you can still change your die. So at 19, for example, that's when you're a die 10. And at 20, you're a +5. And at 21, you're die 12. And 21 and up, you're a die 12. Because I don't think, we're not going to put anyone above that. Although technically, you could say 22, obviously, to be +6. And then 23. Now, most people aren't going to go above 20 above that, because we generally have a ceiling of 22 on player characters, but monsters might have higher die. And like before, your size, like we're saying, the size adjusts speed and hit die. So you might have a plus or negative modifier based off of your size. So if you're small, you automatically go down one category. So your hit die automatically drops regardless of what your constitution is. How does that sound? 23, by the way, would probably be, what would, because that basically tops it out. We don't want multiple dice, because that's just going to annoy people. And I don't want to go to die 20. So we might pull that as the top. It peaks out at die 12. Because jumping to D20, it'll just go crazy from that point. So we might put that as top there. And then 23, it might just be a modifier, maybe. It could just be like D12 +1, and so it doesn't get crazy, and then +7 and so forth. So the modifiers don't change. So I want to propose that as an idea, that your hit die is based off of your highest physical stat. Strength, con. Con's still useful because it's your that creates a situation that can bite you in the ass. Because if con is only being used to resist disease and constitution and vitality, then it becomes the dump stat, right? So maybe we go back to it to being constitution. And constitution, because charisma, yeah, we're giving charisma people a bit of a bonus because you basically get to choose one of 4 skills to be your base. And then charisma can also affect your will save. So it's not terribly useless. But now we're potentially making constitution useless because it's only popping up. Because remember, there aren't any con skills, at least at this point in time. If you go with 5e, there's only 1 skill for strength, which we've already removed because it's going to be it's going to be a given. Acrobatics has a few, but we're going to give it. We might end up doing, adding a strength skill, so at least there's something. But there's nothing for constitution at all. There's nothing for constitution other than the fact that it's going to be your resistance and so forth. So I'm going back to either having it be con, because at that point, then I'll dump everything into strength. If I'm a fighter and I can make my hit points based off of strength, I'll just dump everything into strength and have con lose con. And yeah, we're not going to lose the con suit. We have to keep the 6 attribute scores the way it is. And I know someone's going to say the average, but now we get into that min-maxing thing again. I want to make con kind of important. So maybe we make con determine your die and your hit points. I know the stupid answer to this is separate these so that con is based off of your modifier and strength gives you the die. And that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. But you can create a situation. I mean, you can say it's the average of the 3, but that still puts the ownership into con, and you force people to equalize. I think the con is not a bad idea. And you can create a situation also, for example, we say size adjusts speed and hit die. You can create a situation where a barbarian +1 die step. And you can create a situation where con could determine spell power. I don't know about that. That's not a bad idea, but I think we've already established that we're combining these, these casting attributes as spells and so forth. So I don't know. I still want con to be kind of important. I kind of like this idea that your base die. So the idea, the fact that you can't have no one's ever going to do it, but you can't have a 14 con barbarian. Yes, endurance, exhaustion. I mean, you can play with that. I mean, endless night. If you end up coming up with if we do this again, remind me, because we're not going to get the skills today. So if we get to skills, endurance and exhaustion should be in there. The fact that everyone gets exhausted in the same rate, Constitution should absolutely be a skill. Should have its own skills for endurance, and yeah, we can talk about that when we get to skills. But blood magic and con. I'm not against the idea of having variant spellcasters, right? Like a Paragon Path or some supplement down the road where we create a spellcaster that's entirely con based. I absolutely love the idea of having a con-based spellcaster. I like the idea of having a strength-based spellcaster. That basically, I mean, what is a you can almost say like a firebender could be a strength-based caster, right? So we could create a situation where you can create a unique caster for every ability score. So Jamie, thanks for joining, Jamie. You haven't said anything yet, but thanks for make con your die and hit points. That's kind of what we're shooting at, making con set your die and hit points. And it creates a situation where it makes sense that that would affect your hit points and not necessarily strength or dex. And it creates a situation where con has always been important because it determines your hit points, and this time it determines your die. I do like the idea that size can adjust it. So imagine, for example, that you want to be a halfling barbarian. And you have a 16 con. And that 16 gives you a die 6. But barbarian ups your die to die 8, but then you go back to die 6 because you're a halfling. Like, that's a neat idea. I think it's a neat idea that could be interesting. Hey, Jasal. Also new people here. 40 Constitution with endurance, yes. Con for spellcasting, blah blah. Make con your dying hit points, yeah. Make maybe have con add to AC similar to Dex, but at a different rate. There was something similar, like that was something from, I think it goes all the way back to the original AD&D back from the 80s. Didn't Constitution have something like that? If you hear scratching noises, by the way, those are my degus. They like being noisy the moment I go online, which is hilarious. No, they have hit point adjustment and resurrection survival, but I don't think they had a damage adjustment. Dexterity had defensive value, and damage adjustment and strength for inflicting damage, but that was about it. Now, you run a point. But right now, we've already established ahead of time that reflex defense is it in Dex. You could create a situation, by the way, that when we get to AC, which is something we also still have to get to. Well, we won't get that today. We have to get to skills eventually. That AC could be 10 plus, your armor plus your modifier, but your modifier can be con. Or int or dex. It might be that it could be a situation where I prefer fusing con and strength together personally. If I was making a system completely from the ground up, that was a whole class system that we weren't trying to make a spiritual successor to something that was related to 5e or D&D in general. I might, because when we go, once again, we're going back to GURPS, because remember, GURPS had only 4 attributes compared to the 6. They had health, they had strength, dexterity, and I think intelligence and health. I think those were the numbers. I may be wrong, but they only had 4. I do know they only had 4. And we want to kind of keep that. And I definitely don't want to add any more, because 6 has always been even, 3 physical, 3 mental. That's basically how it works. That is one thing you could do, like with AC. Yeah, you could have Constitution adjust your armor class, and that kind of does the same thing. It's not a bad idea. Because we know that determining your reflex defense and your will defense was based off of those values. And maybe armor class can have a slightly different setup, because it's going to be it has always been an entirely isolated number. 5th edition didn't. It did make it basically. No, actually, it's still an isolated number there. But 4th edition. So determining your AC, I'm trying to see. Did 4th edition allow you to do that? Someone's probably answer it. Over one of the things 4e did, some classes just let you change what mods you used as Warden class, use Con instead of Dex or AC, but that still leaves the issue of why would anyone else want it. So Endless Nights. So Ultramodern does the same thing. Ultramodern introduced a ladder system, which was a series of interconnected feats. With 4th edition, it did something different. With 5th edition, is a series of interconnected feats. But the first level ability allowed you to adjust your primary attack ability. So if you picked the strong character, it's slightly influenced by D20 Modern. If you picked the strong hero, then strength was your attack modifier. If you were the runner, it was the dex, and so forth. I mean, if you picked the veteran, wisdom was your primary attack modifier for ranged weapons. Yeah, you could also have a race as a base hit point. That's tough. I don't know if I want to make it based off of species, because we have humans that would have considerably less hit points. The Rock has way more hit points than I do. And I think that's a combination of his hit point value as well as his Constitution score, not because of his class, because we're all the same classes in real life. But let's see here. Let's see here. Determining AC. Let's see here. Because I think that, because your AC is defense scores. All defenses start with 10 plus half your level. Armor class. Add the armor bonus of your armor you wear. Also add your dex or int modifier. And that's something that's a bit of a flaw in 4th edition. In 4th edition, your reflex and your armor class were determined exactly the same way. And that's something that we may look at. Why isn't AC, in this situation only, AC modifier plus your primary... should it be... Oh, that's tough. Most people, like I said, if you're a dex-based hero, your AC and your attack bonus is using the same attribute. If you're a strength-based fighter, then you get a physical big beefy AC because your dex won't be high, and then once again strength becomes everything, and then your AC is determined, ironically, by your money and by your acquisition of magic, which is a little effed up when you think about it. Where a dex-based person, they spend less money on their armor, but then they rely on this one modifier, dex, to handle both their attack and their modifier for their AC. Strength, he doesn't have his dex modifier, or if it does, it's very low, and then he relies on the money or the power of his magic armor to do that for him. And then everybody else has it as well. So why don't you create a situation where in this situation only, your AC, say AC could be either your primary physical stat or your highest stat, period. Because AC is slightly isolated. right? So yeah, you could also have race as a base. Oh yeah, we did that already. I think hit point. I think we'll keep it with this one. Maybe a specific species will have a modifier to their base attribute, their base hit die, but I don't want to make that a pattern. So maybe like a dwarf specifically will have it. And a halfling will also have a modifier, but not because he's dainty, but because they're just small. So AC 10 plus armor plus a modifier. And that modifier is your primary physical stat. Or your highest period. I think it should be the highest period stat. It still puts usefulness in your con, but it makes your it does what the dex space fighter does automatically, which is dumps your attack and ability under one modifier instead of two. Because a strength-based fighter is still only relying on one attribute, his strength, and a dex-based fighter is relying it for two values, but he's still relying only on one stat. So I think in this situation there could be an argument made the fact that your AC is based off your highest stat, wherever that may be. I know someone's going to say, wait a second, because someone persuade their armor class. And in that situation, I say, F it, why not? I mean, in the rare few situations, why isolate charisma in this situation? We can make an argument why con would adjust your AC, why dex and strength, and we can technically do it for int and even whiz. What is Neo? Neo in the Matrix is probably using his wisdom for his AC. So we can create justification for all of these except for charisma. So why would we just say what the WTF? Just include charisma for the heck of it. The heavier your armor is, the less important agility and dexterity. I have trained in martial arts for years. Okay, all right, let's talk about this. Okay, so that's true. And we could create a situation. Well, once again, this highest physical stat is still adjusted by your armor. Like, we haven't changed that. So your primary physical modifier, primary stat, the highest stat, highest ability modifier. But that is still adjusted by armor. So if you're wearing low armor, why not just call charisma will? And yeah, so just so like we adjust this, but like we talked about renaming all of the attributes. And we decided ultimately to not do that because we want to make sure things are recognizable. Otherwise, that's a good argument. We would change charisma to will, but at that point, it kind of blurs the line between charisma and wisdom anyway. So, going to what we said earlier, AC would still be adjusted by armor. So, give armor a max applicable dex modifier. That's exactly what I'm saying, right? That's exactly what I'm saying. So instead of being max dex modifier, it's a max modifier, just max mod. You would just call it max mod. Instead of max dex, max mod, and then you don't mess with it. A sort of mental constitution, if you will. No, I like the idea, Jassel. I think it's actually a valid idea. I just think I don't want to deviate too much, but I give you credit for the idea. Your contribution is appreciated. So I think if there's no other I know Rye's on board. This is the last thing we'll do, and then we'll end up for the day because we're already hitting 2.5 hours. That will make armor the adjusted by your modifier and your armor, but the type of armor you have can adjust your maximum. And that's not something that's owned by 5th edition. That's been going back since 3.5. Also, armor should reduce damage. Okay, Jamie, we're going to have a conversation about this because if you look at Ultramodern has a chapter called Ultramax. And Ultramax is a variant rule system that makes it very hard to survive if you play traditional D&D. What we do, we increase your hit points. We lowered your hit points, radically increased your AC, based entirely on dex. So your armor in no way adjusted your AC. Armor was entirely a defense reduction. So when you made your character, you could go high dex and hope that your maneuverability. And remember, Ultramax also had an adjustment table. So your AC adjusted based off of AC. Why not, Rye? If you were running if you were moving between 25 and 30 feet, you had a bonus to AC. If you were moving 35 to 40, you had another AC. You had ACs depending. This attack modifier got adjusted based off cover, based off movement, based off shrouding, based off of how far you were away. It wasn't just disadvantage of a certain distance, and also call shots. You could actually do a called shot. You can try to aim for someone's head. So Ultramux gave you this massive expansion on attacks, but it also made hitting people a lot harder. We did that because we took hit points and we broke it into 4 categories. And so if you took a hit, the first hit, you were pretty okay. If you took a second hit, even at high levels, you were kind of screwed. So we made it very hard to hit people. So the idea that if you were shooting a gun in Ultramax, you would miss 5 or 6 times. But then when you hit, you would take someone out almost immediately. And so if you wanted to not get hit, you couldn't just stand straight up and fire your gun. You had to move. If you were prone, you'd have to create a situation where it was not easy to get hit, because if you stayed completely still in open terrain at point blank range, you're dead. You're just dead. And that was Ultramax. But that was an entirely optional set of rules. And I don't want to mess with that. But trust me, I have approached that and I've done that. And once again, we may, if this goes to print per se, I may throw in the Ultramax rules, because remember, Ultramodern is we contributed that to the SRD. It's OGL as well. You can't take the setting, but all the mechanics are OGL. Chances are I'm going to take all of Ultramodern and dump it in this. So everything I learned. So this system won't be universal fantasy. It'll be universal everything. So we will have firearm rules. We will have all of that. Unlike something like D&D, which doesn't have firearm rules, we'll probably have all of that. So you can create any system you want instead of just fantasy. So I may throw in the Ultramax rules just as an option, saying, hey, you want to punish your players? Try this on for size. Okay, so if there's no objections, I think AC being adjusted by your highest ability modifier, I think that's the way to go. I still haven't seen anybody object to it, so we'll kind of move with that. Okay, so that'll be it for the day. Now, if any of you guys want to have like a credit, it's at dsxmachina@gmail.com. Yes, it may come off looking at DSX machine. It's not. It's dsxmachina@gmail.com. You can send me your email address. So it'll send me an email with your name, and I will throw it up at the top here. And this document will be perpetual. Perpetual. I'll make sure this gets saved, and we'll return to it again. Now, for the next week, I'm going to be keeping an eye on this specific video. If, for example, it proves popular and you guys want to keep on doing this, even if it's just a dozen of you, I'll do this again next week. We can do this again. We can do this every Wednesday at 12 o'clock and muck around for 2 hours talking about these rules and just hash out this system. So I have no problem doing this again, and I have no problem continuing to do this. Maybe I'll produce a document and I'll have it put in the comments that can be downloadable, where it's this, not necessarily in crappy form like this, but it'll be composed in a way. Cover is more important in a fight that could be represented as just its advantage. You're right, Hal. You're right. You're absolutely right. And that's something we can approach when we get to stuff like cover and concealment. Now remember, 4th edition had cover and concealment. I think 5e removed them into just one. And we can throw that back in. We can throw in modifiers to speed and stuff if we want to play with more advanced rules. But like I said, we're going to end that for now. I'm going to compile this into a completed document, and people can then download it. If this proves popular and you guys want to keep on doing this, we can try to do this again next week at noon, depending on schedule, and we will start. And if we do, next time we'll do it, we're going to talk about skills. We're going to talk about, we talked about AC, we're going to talk about skills, we'll talk about a lot about skills and how skills work, and we'll probably start working and how classes work. And we've already played with some of the idea with classes, the idea that we're taking modifiers. But we may end up going a couple race species examples and a couple of class examples. And there's a few more things I want to talk about regarding combat. And we might do combat before we do classes, because that'll help us design classes. So yeah, chances are we'll do, if we do I'll finish the size adjustment rules. We'll mention that. Skills and combat will be next. And then after we play with combat, then we can look at classes and see how we want to present them. and my voice is going, which is not great considering that I have a cold, or I'm getting over a cold. Okay, guys. So this worked. I'm gonna try to figure out this bloody OBS thing so I can figure out a way to schedule a stream and then have it go live instead of another video going, and then trying to get the Facebook algorithm to work. If we end up doing this again, I'm really hoping you guys all just tune in for it, and we can continue playing with this system. And if anyone else who's a game designer who's following this, I hope we gave you some inspiration, gave you some ideas. Just don't copyright it, because you can't be copyrighted. As my disclaimer, once again, this is an entirely free system that, if it ends up becoming something, will be donated for free. It will be offered as a complete SRD, as an OGL, and will not be owned. It will be entirely a community-created. I am the chief cook and bottle watcher of this experiment, but I am just one voice, and I like to convey everyone's voices. Yes, this will be obviously a lot of me, but I want to make sure everyone who helps gets their name in the credits. You never know. I mean, there'll be playtesters and there'll be contributors, and all the contributors will be more important than the playtesters, right? Okay, guys, that's it from me. Please comment in the comments about any other ideas you have. Just because this video is ending doesn't mean this conversation is over on these topics. Post it in the comments what you think. Post comments about things you like or dislike. I will change the wingdings and then copyright it. Yeah. Yeah. Basically, I'm turning this all into Comic Sans the moment that we're done off the stream. Anyway, I will convert this, and I'll have a document probably by today or tomorrow, depending on my own schedule. And we will look at this again. Comment in the video below, like and subscribe, please. But comment things you change, and then if we do this video again, we'll look at the comments from this video, and we'll determine if things need to change. Okay, guys. This has been Chris from Deus Ex Machina. We've been at this for 2 hours. And let's fight for open source gaming. Let's fight for OGL. Let's fight for Open D&D. And don't give up. It's been Chris from Deus Ex Machina.